everybody. Have you been missing the ever-lovely Brad and his stream of endless and rather unusual JDM vehicles? Well, fear not, because today he's back with this, a Nissan Fuga. Now, just for those who haven't been watching the channel regularly, Brad is a lovely chap who remains off-screen that has been bringing me cars for years now, and I think this is something like his 14th or 15th, with a few exceptions, including a couple of Range Rovers and a Rolls-Royce. They have all been Japanese imports that he's brought over himself. But unlike many people that are obsessed with the Skylines, RX-7s and Supras of the world, Brad likes the somewhat more ordinary cars, which I think are actually, because of that, rather extraordinary. And he's brought me stuff like a Honda Elysion, recently the Mitsubishi Lancer thing, and a whole bunch of other stuff too. If you want to see some of those videos, well, just check out my JDM playlist. And what we have here today is a Nissan Fuga. And for my Western viewers, this is a car you're not going to be entirely unfamiliar with, because we did get it only badged as an Infinity, depending on the year, either an M or a Q70. The thing is, though, that here in Britain, an Infinity is already a fairly rare and unusual thing, and in fact the brand left Britain wholesale a few years ago, making this a very unusual car. In fact, I checked this morning, and presently on Auto Trader there are none for sale. And it's not often I can say that about a car, including JDM weirdness. The Subaru Exige that I recently drove, which actually wasn't brought to me by Brad, an oddball 7-seater Subaru MPV estate kind of cross type thing, well, there were about 7 of those for sale, to give you some sort of context. So then, what exactly is it that we're actually dealing with here? Well, the easiest way I think to explain it is as the love child of a Nissan 370Z and a BMW 5 Series. It is a mid-size, executive, 4-door saloon, and I think actually not a bad looking one at that. It is built on what Nissan call their FM platform, front midship, for the fact that the engine, though it is in the front of the car, is pushed quite far back. And that engine here is the 3.7 litre V6 VQ engine, the HR variant, as you would have seen in the later 370Zs. It makes 330-ish horsepower, 333 PS if you want to be exact, and 268 pounds-feet of torque, that's 363 newton meters. You could have also had this car with a smaller 2.5 litre variant of essentially the same thing, making around 220 horses, and you could also get the 3.5 litre version of the engine in hybrid guise, making just a little bit less power than this. What we have here is the second generation of the Fuga nameplate. The first landed in 2004, was replaced with this in 2009, but the second generation lived on until 2022, becoming a very important car in the Nissan lineup, because though when this car was introduced there were 2 models above it, the Shimmer and the President, both of them were discontinued in 2010, leaving this as the de facto flagship of the Nissan range. Although in 2012 the Shimmer nameplate was reintroduced, but it was in fact a long wheelbase version of the hybrid variant of this. So I think you can safely say that for the last sort of 15 years, this was the top flight Nissan, and therefore a very important car to get right. And I've got to say, actually, from here, I think they have gotten a fair bit right. I love big, old-school, naturally aspirated multi-cylindered engines. They just work well. This car is virtually standard, barring the 20-inch GTR wheels, which I think have compromised the ride a little bit, but also do look quite good. And weirdly, from that seat, when we went out to do my drive-bys this morning, the car did feel a little firmer than it currently does. It is actually a sportier thing to experience than you might expect. I've yet to put my foot down, but even driving normally, it's got a nice keen turn-in. The wheel has a lot of feedback and texture coming through it. On that note, by the way, just in case you're wondering, this one has been retrimmed by Royal steering wheels because, well, it was sort of falling apart, in spite of the fact the car is on relatively low mileage, just 66,000. And you can tell that this was not only a car aimed at the Japanese market, but more specifically the upper end of it, because there is still a lot of Japanese in this. I find with Japanese market cars, the posher they are, the less English you seem to get. This has still got quite a bit of it, and the nav and infotainment system over here has now been converted to English, and if you want for even more money, you can convert the buttons as well, but Brad, having had many of these sorts of things, has just memorized them. He's left me on one of the general economy displays and whatnot, which annoyingly hasn't been converted. It's doing 5 kilometers a litre, which I think is okay. The gearbox is a 7-speed automatic, though sadly there are no paddle shifters for it. You can engage manual mode if you want by pulling the lever over here, and then it goes the wrong way, pull towards you for down, push away for up. I'll play with that in a little bit. I should also point out for completeness that if you do get the hybrid, you have a different gearbox, a clever dual clutch, apparently. This, meanwhile, is the same 7-speed automatic which you'd have got in all of the other 370 branded cars of the time that came with it, and in my experience, it's actually generally a pretty good box. Below it, you've got a little selector for your different drive modes, though those don't affect the suspension, which is passive, instead altering the powertrain. So you've got snow, eco, regular or comfort, which is what I'm in now, and sport. And they do exactly what you expect. So you pop it into eco and it really does blunt the throttle quite a bit. And if you put your foot down even more than a hair, the eco light will flash at you angrily as if to go, "What are you doing? Think of the trees, man." In standard mode, not comfort, sorry, I got that wrong. It is then, well, perfectly pleasant, nice, easy to drive. It's a decent thing. Feels a little bit claustrophobic in here, I have to say. There's plenty of glass in it, but despite the fact you've got a light-coloured headliner, sadly no sunroof, it does just feel like quite a tight car. It's really wrapped around you. In some ways, that's a nice thing, because it means you can place it easily and makes it feel quite sporty, but it doesn't feel particularly luxurious on that front. This is the base model, the 370 GT. Beyond that, you could also get a Sport, which had 20-inch wheels by default. This came originally on 18s. You also got Akebono brakes and I think a sportier suspension setup. There was also a premium package, which gave you full heated leather. This has got kind of leather and leather effect, and this is actually not bad. That's soft touch stuff. And you got some fabric, which actually I don't mind, because it's all very Japanese. And then at the top of the range, you had a package which some call the SP, others I've seen called the VIP, which basically combines everything. Brad bought this because it was on low mileage and also appeared to be in good condition. And honestly, the car is very, very clean. It is going through town here with the potholes, manhole covers, road repairs and the like, where you can sense that suspension is on the firm side. I did ask Brad and he said that, yes, unsurprisingly, the move from 18s to 20s did compromise the ride a touch. It's not horrendous, and actually I've driven far worse cars, but for something like this, I just expected it to be a little more luxurious. In terms of its Japanese rivals, I suppose the closest would be the Toyota Crown, and courtesy of the lovely Brad, I've actually had a chance to sample a few of those lately, and this feels roughly equivalent, though I would say not as nice as either the Crown Majesta or the Crown Hybrid that I drove, not courtesy of Brad, only a few weeks ago. In fact, at the time of filming this, that video hasn't been released, but by the time you see this, you'll have seen that. Those just feel like they're a little more upmarket, have a little more leather and everything, but this is still, it's perfectly nice. And actually, I do recall with the Hybrid making very similar comments about the suspension, that around town it felt just a little firm. This I don't think is actually as bad as that. But the real test is going to be if out on the road it makes sense, because the Crown Hybrids, it just didn't. I've got high hopes for this though. Now, this being a relatively high-end Japanese car, remember, Infiniti isn't sold to the Japanese. They don't need it because they believe that their own brands can make nice stuff. It's got some nice features in it, and the selling point of this car is its forest air conditioning, which I am now going to engage. It's quite clever, really, and there is a lot going on. At a quick glance, you would think that all it is just some foresty sounding scent cartridges, which is nothing really particularly revolutionary. I mean, 15 years ago, Citroën would have sold you a C4 with a little perfume insert. But this is a lot more clever than that, and it combines a number of different things. First off, you have a sensor, which again, not revolutionary, works out exactly how much fresh or recirculated air you want, based on the quality of the air both inside and outside the cabin. It will also, using a couple of different user configurable settings, give you a breeze that is variable, designed to mimic the unevenness that you'd get from wind. It doesn't just sit there blasting you full pelt all the time, and even that alone is really quite nice. I suppose you could argue in some ways that the swing air vents you see on many Japanese Toyotas gives you a similar thing, but the fact is that's a very repetitious affair. It does it the same way every time. This is designed to be random. It's nice, it's natural feeling. You also have a grapeseed polyphenol cabin filter, and I'm sure that doesn't require any explanation whatsoever. And then finally, you do have a scent cartridge, which combines a couple of different fragrances, one of a leaf and one of wood, but both of which are designed to be very subtle. You don't really go, oh, wow, that's really leafy. Instead, it just makes the whole thing feel more pleasant. And I've got to say, I don't think it's actually a gimmick. You press the button, and it does really feel like a very different kind of air conditioning. Now we find ourselves on a fun little bit of road, so let's put the car into sport mode, gearbox into manual, and see what she's like when you want to hustle it. It's actually not that bad. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, it is not the last word in dynamics. Once you do begin to pile on the speed, you can feel that the chassis is just about coping. And I will say, I think it is doing a better job than the Toyota did. It's an enjoyable thing. That steering is really, really quite keen, and actually similarly to that Toyota, it feels like the steering is a touch keener than the chassis really wants it to be. But overall, you can enjoy it. It's these corners, fast flowing ones, that the thing really enjoys the most. And though the body still retains an air of firmness about it, it does make a lot more sense on these roads. And to be perfectly honest, the car was designed for Japanese ones. They are notoriously smooth. These are not. The one thing I am having a little bit of an issue with is the brakes. They're bringing me to a stop, but I can sense that they are past their best because there is a little bit of a wobble in there. The gearbox also isn't particularly quick to respond, and I tried putting it into drive, but sport, and it didn't really work so great either. Meanwhile, if you then have it in drive but sport, it just holds onto gears for a little longer than you think it should. It's just not quite configured right. And now, let's test the turning circle. Yeah, it's all right. It is all right. Full power. Yeah, it's brisk, I would say. Not particularly fast. Yes, 330 horsepower, but also not masses of torque. In fact, the numbers here are very similar to those of the old E46 M3's engine, a car that I actually drove in real time yesterday, and that was quite a bit quicker. The steering here is actually better. Oh, I upset so many people when I talk about M3 steering, but it would appear that only Jack from number 27 and I seem to agree. on the rubbishness of the E46 M3 steering, and that is a hill that we will both gladly die on. Oh, right, so this is rather unfortunate. I looked up earlier the meaning of the name, because very often there is something behind it. It's just that this being a Japanese car, we don't really know what it is. Incidentally, I love the chirpy Japanese lady who greets you, and she said "konbanwa" to me earlier, and I think that means it's the evening wherever this car was. Anyway, I originally thought they might have named the car for that poisonous pufferfish that people are so obsessed with, but I think that's a fugu, not a fuga. Fuga in Japanese instead apparently means gracious, elegant. Unfortunately, when I first put that into Google, it told me that it meant leakage, because apparently in Latin that is closer to what it means. I don't think anyone's ever going to buy a Nissan leakage, are they? Oh dear. Alright, let's talk more boring stuff, shall we? Rear seat space, that's pretty good. I'd say, yeah, it's decent, in line with, I think, closer to a 3 Series than a 5 Series, but it's good. Boot space, yeah, very good, no complaints whatsoever. As an aside, Brad also hasn't had very much luck with this car. He's been meaning to bring it to me for, I think, the thick end of a year. But first off, some ne'er-do-well made away with the one and only key that he had for it. He then had an awful time trying to get a new key made. And though he went with somebody that was supposed to be reputable, they just couldn't get it to work. And it turned out that was because they'd bought replica keys from China that just don't work. Which I suppose is nice to know that, you know, some of the car's security system actually does function. Once you buy a proper, genuine Nissan key, programming it isn't actually that difficult. You just have to get someone to buy the genuine and correct key. This not being a European model, that can be difficult. And I think there is something about the key that means it's not just a case of buying the one that would work for an Infiniti either. He then, when fitting the tyres, made the schoolboy error of buying the front and rears in the correct widths, but with matching profiles. So the fronts were perfect, they worked, they're fine, but the rears looked daft. They looked like tractor tyres. I have to say, though I had my doubts, they do actually suit this quite well. And if they were in silver, I think you wouldn't know they weren't genuine tyres. 285s on the back of something like this, I think is a little excessive, but it fits the rim, it works, and it actually looks kind of right. I thought it wouldn't, but it does. He also, because this is the way that he is, didn't want to bring me the car until the forest air conditioning was working correctly. And it may shock you to know that his local Nissan dealer did not have grapeseed polyphenol filters on the wall. So he had to import those, and a couple of the companies that dealt with it were a little bit weird because for some reason they didn't want to send the little scent cartridge. I think they thought it was going to just explode. It won't. And if it did, you just smell a bit leafy and woody. And then most recently, he took the family on safari in it and drove it through the monkey enclosure, where the resident simians decided that they were going to take exception to some of the rubber trims on the corner of the windscreen. One of them, they handily and helpfully just threw onto the bonnet so it could be retrieved, but the other was thrown into what can only be described as a sort of nest of car parts they have apparently been working on for quite some time. And just that little piece of rubber was some 40 quid. As we're on the topic of price, what exactly is it you'd pay for one of these? Well, that's really interesting because ordinarily I would say that, yeah, it's Japanese, it's weird. Yes, I know you could get a European equivalent, and the fact is the European one is basically cheaper because it was already here. So really you'll get that unless you really must have the Japanese one. But that's not the case with this, because though yes, at a quick glance, you can get yourself into the Infiniti equivalent, the M30, 35, 37, depending on era, for reasonable money, starting at sort of $6,000 or so. Many of those are the earlier generation, and a lot of them are the diesel, which today has fallen out of favour. And though they did sell effectively this here, the M37, it would have been badged, people are asking quite a lot for them. And the ones I did see, which appeared vaguely equivalent to this, well, people were asking in the higher teens for it. But Brad reckons this is worth more like 10. So actually, for once, it is also the good value option. And in America, they did do the Infinitis with a nice big V8, but honestly, here, actually, this engine kind of works. And yes, I'd love a V8 too, but if you really want a Nissan with a V8, go treat yourself. Get a President. Very cool cars. And I have to say, this is actually another car that Brad has offered to me where I've gone, it's a what? Okay, how is that different to all the other things you've brought over that I've driven already? And he said, no, give it a try, give it a try. And you know what? I think of all the stuff he's brought me recently, with the potential exception of the Toyota Crown Majesta, this is the one that I would have. Yeah, I like it. I like the wood, I like the shapes, I like the look of it from the outside as well. Makes a half nice noise too. Would sound great with a bit of an exhaust on it, a bit of an exhaust. My friend Anthony is watching, he doesn't understand the concept of a bit of an exhaust. He just does an exhaust, but that's his problem. However, you know what? I quite like it. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you as ever to Brad for bringing it out, and of course to you for watching. And don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.